The Prime Minister, as I said before, has backflipped on his backflip to not add any new questions to the 2026 census about LGBT Australians. So originally the government said there would be questions in the census about sexuality and transgender and intersex people. Then during the week, the Treasurer Jim Chalmers said those questions wouldn't be included because they wanted to avoid nastiness. What sort of nastiness he was talking about, I don't really know. But that then angered the LGBT activists and lobby groups who felt they were then being excluded. So on Friday, Anthony Albanese said there would be a question about sexual preferences after all, but he's refused to add anything about transgenderism. Liberal Senator Andrew Bragg told the Insiders on ABC this morning that he believes there should be a question on gender identity.
My view for a couple of years is that asking questions about gender identity and sexual orientation are reasonable questions to ask.
Not a woke issue, as Peter Dutton said during the week.
My view has been that those are reasonable questions to ask, and I think it's very disappointing for the LGBT community to have put faith perhaps in this government and they have been let down.
There's no question, there's a question, there's half a question. Caroline, what's going on?
It's just yet another example of what happens when you try to appease and pander to these activists. It's never enough. I mean, if they were to add... I don't even know how they're going to add this question about sexuality. We have so many different sexualities, pansexual, asexual. I can't even keep up. This census is going to be another at least 80 pages longer than it usually is, unless they just have an other box.
It's going to be like the Cosmo sealed section.
Yeah.
It's like, what's going to be like
voting below the line in the Senate.
Which is possibly an option. There's some has been. Look, my wife works for Equality Australia, which I always have to say as a disclaimer before these things. So I've just heard everything. They've been going at it for ages. There was supposed to be these changes. They were in the works for years since the previous government. And then understandably, obviously, with a cost of living crisis just kicking everyone in the wazoo and the failure of the Voice referendum because it looked like a kind of, and again, I support it, but I understand it bore all the hallmarks of a kind of left-wing ideological joyride and was often run as such. They just don't want to touch anything that has even the faintest whiff about that with a barge pole, even when, in this case, it's perfectly reasonable and legitimate. It's just a matter of gathering more information. That's right. It's just another question.
When Chalmers said they're worried about nastiness, what did he mean?
I think he's talking about us. I think he's talking about getting nasty.
What they're actually saying is they don't want to be dragged into a culture war, and which will then suck all their energy, suck all their time, and then they'll be accused of not talking about the cost of living that matters. And this is exactly what Peter Dutton did. And again,
but they didn't spend the week talking about cost of living. They spent the week talking about a question and the census.
That's the whole problem. That's right.
This was their own goal. This was their own
This was not their doing. They just wanted to forget about it, not talk about it. And it was Equality Australia and the queer community
absolute inability to control the message, control the agenda.
No, that's right. They lost. So the LGBTQ community and, you know, again, my wife's organisation, Alex Greenwich, others, the independent MP in New South Wales, found out that they weren't going to do this and they just lost their proverbial. And they were furious because it had been promised to them, or that was certainly their understanding, and so they made a whole lot of noise, and the government has now been dragged into talking about this thing, which it didn't want to talk about. It just wanted to say, look, let's just get to the election, cost of living, you know, as Radiohead said, no alarms and no surprises, just straight bread and butter stuff. And yet again, they've been dragged into talking about something, an issue that is very important to the progressive left, not that important to most people. Doesn't mean it's illegitimate. I think it is legitimate and it should be done. But it's the sort of thing, if you were going to do it, you just want to do it quickly and get it done and get it out of the way and not have it suck up.
Let me start the culture wars for you, okay? I'll start the culture wars for you. The first point is, I just had a look before we came on air, so it might have changed in the last 15 minutes. But in that time, there were 72 genders. So when you make the joke about a sealed section in the Cosmo, literally how many pages are going to be there? Do we identify by order of preference? Do we identify as one? I can tell you, if you put cis female or cis male on the census as a question, 80% of Australians would know what you were talking about for a start. So that'd be an interesting result. But the other thing that gets me is transgenderism is not a sexuality. It's a gender.
That's right. Yeah,
it's a gender issue. It's not a sexuality issue.
That's
and
right.
so this continual conflating of the issues, I think misses the point. And, I mean, there's your culture war started because you're now about to have the T of the rest of the alphabet losing their minds. But it's not a sexuality. And yet the question is now going to be focused on sexuality.
Well, no, he said this is why Albo has said no. This is why Albo has said yes. We'll ask about sexuality, are you gay, straight, bi, whatever, but we're not going to include what gender you identify as or whatever. And this is why obviously the trans community is still PO'd and very PO'd.